Facts 92.3 Nigeria. Well, for this hour, we're having conversations around the right to protest, where that right begins and ends. Well, thanks to the events of the not so distant past, as recently as this morning, we have a case study. The hashtag Free Nnamdi Kanu protest began in Abuja this morning at the Transcorp Hilton Hotel around 7 a.m. with a heavy security presence. Eyewitnesses say security operatives fired shots in the air and released tear gas, forcing protesters to flee. The demonstrators later regrouped, chanting Free Nnamdi Kanu and tear gas cannot stop us. Speaking on Channels Television, activist Omoyele Shore, the convener of the protest, said soldiers and civil defense officers attacked the peaceful march, beating several protesters, including Nnamdi Kanu's brother and lawyer, Aloy Ejimako, who were later taken away.
Huge contingent of police came, army, civil defense, and we started telling them that we're not their enemies, it's not about them. And suddenly from nowhere, they started shooting at us, tear gas. There were some live bullets fired, but luckily enough, I don't think anybody was hit with a live bullet, but they were just shooting all around us. Eventually, they did arrest some people. I heard Nnamdi Kanu's younger brother was arrested and beaten, and his lawyer Jimako, was also arrested and beaten. They've all taken them to the FCT command right now.
Shore described the incident as an unprovoked attack, insisting that peaceful protest is a constitutional right. He explained that although the law does not require police permission for protest, his team had officially informed the authorities beforehand. Reacting to a counter-protest held days earlier by groups opposing Kanu's release, Shore said both sides deserve equal rights to demonstrate, arguing that allegations linking Kanu to killings lack credible evidence and should be tested in court.
The fact that people have the right to say what they want to say is not something I'm against. But other people who feel differently also have the right to express their position. So what we have told the federal government, or those prosecuting Nnamdi Kanu, is that in 4 years, if he killed anybody, if he molested anybody, how is it that they don't make it to the courtroom? He's been in detention since 2021. Why can't you present this evidence to the judge? Nobody did that. Everybody's just making up stories here and there, and nobody's talking about the 28 people that were killed in his father's compound.
All right. Now, as stated earlier, when we took the big stories, the Nigeria police warned protesters to obey a court order barring demonstration in high security zones, including the Presidential Villa, National Assembly, and Eagle Square. The entire list is the Aso Rock Villa, National Assembly Complex, Force Headquarters, Court of Appeal, Eagle Square, and Shehu Shagari Way. Those were the areas the protesters were told to avoid. So we start from there and, of course, get deeper into this conversation. My guest is Chief Festus Oguche. He's a legal practitioner and analyst, and, well, the one we run to when we have legal controversies that need clarification.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you, Sam.
It's always a
good
pleasure.
Afternoon, very hot afternoon here in Port Harcourt.
Yes, indeed. The sun is needed at this time because the rain has been...
Yes, it has been something else. But the sun is overdoing itself, if you permit my phrase.
The sun is possibly protesting.
Yes, well, I think so.
All right. So let's start with the police's response. The Federal High Court in Abuja issuing an interim injunction restraining the protesters from staging protests within and around several high security zones. What's your take on that? Is that in order or out of order?
Well, before I go into that issue, I think what we have to clarify whether live ammunitions were used. I think it's rather awkward for anybody to use live ammunition for a peaceful protest. Even if it's violent, it will get to a particular stage before you can use live ammunition. So I can draw example from the Kenyan protests. The resort had to ammunitions and guns at the last minute when the thing was getting out of hand, particularly when the protesters entered the National Assembly. At the preliminary stage of this kind of a thing, why should live ammunitions be used? So we better get clarifications on that so that we can define the limits of what the police or security authorities can do in the face of a protest. And maybe I also find awkward the involvement of the military. You see, there are soldiers also, and I was thinking whether that was necessary at all. But then, to your question, it's the normal thing. But then we have acquired it like a sort of tradition that each time there's a threat that maybe people call for protests, the government usually run to the courts. In labor, you find them going to the National Industrial Court to obtain an injunction, interim or interlocutory, and restricting protesters from specific places. I don't think it will require any restriction to stop them from going to Asherah, for instance. There are places that are rather, I wouldn't say sacred, but they are sacred, not in the religious sense, but rather in the political sense. That's the abode of the president, the National Assembly, where the legislators hold their office, hold take their positions, and maybe the Supreme Court. So what are they going there to do in the first place? But then the protesters, the organizers are saying that they have not been served with any order of court. And I read something on social media also saying that that there was no such order, that it was the application was refused by the judge of the Federal High Court. And now we have a situation where they are saying there are orders for restrictions in certain places. I don't think these procedures are really very necessary. The right to protest is constitutional. It's embedded in our law. It's also embedded in several international covenants and declarations which Nigeria is signatory. And I don't think it should be something that ordinarily would portend the premonition of fear of the unknown when people protest, particularly in very salient areas. Okay. I think protests should be encouraged. It's a way of telling the government that this is our position, so that the government can also know the test the pulse of the people to certain very, very important issues that govern them, that apply to them, that touch on their lives. The protest essentially is for the long incarceration of Nnamdi Kanu, which I will tell you rightly that it is totally and completely unjustified in every ramification of justice, in every ramification of the application of law, in every ramification of freedom. So there's nothing really wrong with it, except maybe people in government, they usually have the fear of the unknown, that this thing could trickle and become or expand and go into certain areas that are a little unpalatable. But I don't think there's anything wrong with protests, constitutionally speaking.
Okay. So, usually in Nigeria, there is a way that things work, and if there's a recurrence of what eventually becomes habit, culture, tradition, and possible our own lifestyle, we tend to give our own spin to the definition. Now in Nigeria, it seems alerting the police before embarking on a protest has become a norm, because a lot of times when the police claims that it got intelligence that the protest will be hijacked by hoodlums, the response of the protesters usually is that we informed the police. That's usually their response. And they almost always have proof. So, let's get it clear now. According to the provisions of the Constitution, what is the correct protest protocol in Nigeria to avoid disruption by the police of any kind?
There's no protocol at all. And if you call it a tradition, it's one that we got from the colonial. It's a colonial heritage. Before now, the law is that you must write to the police, get the approval of the police. And that's under what's the name of this law now? Get the approval of the police. There's a law for that. And that was essentially to restrict
Public Order
Acts, to restrict the fighters for independence and those who are clamoring for self-government. And at that time, the Nnamdi Azikiwes and Awolowos, you find that kind of law in most Commonwealth countries that were colonized by Britain. And it was enacted as at that time that you must get the notice of the police. That essentially had been abrogated by the Court of Appeal in the case of Inspector General of Police against the ANPP, an order gotten by the very people who are now in positions of authority, who are now averse to protests. in 2007, and the law was said to be antithetical to constitutional norms, that it's against, or rather, it impinges on fundamental rights, and so it was totally set aside, sort of a judicial repeal of that provision, of that law.
Yeah.
And we are saying that it is no longer applicable. Being not applicable, it's not necessary. There's no procedure, no process for going into a protest. I can just come out from these studios now and organize one or two persons. I will walk on the streets. I walk all the way to the government house and tell Fubara to please tell this ICECC man to give us our 20 billion with immediate effect and automatic alacrity. So it's something that is not restricted. You can't restrict it. You can't curtail it. It's a fundamental right. So notice to the police is just for convenience. And that notice is not for the police to come and stop the protests or to come and curtail the protests, but rather to protect the protesters.
Okay.
So the tradition all over the world, even in Britain, where the Public Order Act was gotten from, was inherited, has abrogated that law. You don't need anything. If some few Nigerians can go, you see them, even foreigners protesting in Britain. It's a right. It's a fundamental right. And when you get to see a government that is averse to protests, then you begin to ask questions about the government's credibility. And to some extent, its attitude to the people, its legitimacy.
Okay, so let's talk about the impact on the people, the city, and every other, thing that the protest might affect. There are videos on social media of people complaining in Abuja about traffic, transportation cost, and some factors that are directly linked to the protest. While protesters have a right to protest, if I'm driving to work and thanks to a march, it is clear that I'm going to be at the office later than I should, that has some impact on me.
Definitely.
While I'm not against your right, now you're kind of on. And how that affect others who may not protest, or just regular people who are going about their lives. Where do you draw the line, and how do you know when you're beginning to, cross that line, infringe or violate, or, just an overreach of what you believe is your right?
Probably that's why we have counter-protests in Nigeria. It's a new lexicon. It's a new word that has come, that while people are protesting the other way, others will protest this way.
That's quite convenient.
But then your right to swing your arms stops right in front of my nose. If you smack it in exercise of that right, you have violated my fundamental right as well. And that is a matter that should be looked at. But we should look at it within the context also of the exercise of that right. That if you had prior knowledge that there will be such protests along the route that you take to your office, you must take certain precautions and what have you. There are counter rights. But then the contingency of a particular right depends on the extent to which it affects the society. The protest for Nnamdi Kanu, for instance, is not just because of Nnamdi Kanu, but because of the possible victimization of people in future. The unending cycle of prosecution, at a point it turned into persecution and all that, detention should be one of intense interest to any member of the society. And so it's not that anybody will come and be indifferent to it. Even you may have a contrary opinion, and some other persons are saying on social media that I read that, well, the man has criminal charges against him. He must be answerable to those charges. And I think it's rather awkward that a matter that is in court and becomes a subject matter of protests. Judicial decisions do not necessarily have to pander to public policy, public will, public interest, public expectation. The members of the public could have expectations in one particular direction, and the decision will go the other way, because a whole lot of things are involved in decision making of the courts: jurisprudence, legal science, philosophy, evidence, factual proof of evidence, evaluation of that evidence. The members of the public will not be there to assess whether this man actually killed somebody or did not kill somebody, but the judge, in his that some decisions should not pander to public interest or public expectation.
Yeah.
In elections, for instance, because the members of the public know the persons they voted for.
Yeah.
And that is why we are reclining our own values and saying that is the direction for electoral reforms and judicial reforms. But then, it all said and done, I think the issue of Mazi Nnamdi Kanu is one that should arouse the interest of any member of our society.
Indeed.
You know, we are in a democracy and we cannot allow certain things to happen. You know, there has been several decisions in his favor, from Kenya to Umuahia to Abuja to the Court of Appeal, and they're still holding on to this man. What's the problem? If they have a problem with him, they should let people know. If he's a security threat in such manner that his freedom or his release from unending detention is inimical to the interests of the country, they should let the members of the public know, because any other person can be a victim tomorrow. And we cannot have a society that is not properly fashioned towards freedom, towards liberty, the guarantee of these rights, which are fundamental in our constitution. That's the point we are making.
Okay. So after the break, which comes up shortly, we'll talk about those court decisions that seem to be in the favor of Nnamdi Kanu. But I'd like to look at the developed world, as we like to call those countries, and ask myself, how did they handle themselves in these kinds of moments? The civil rights movement was at the peak of its powers in the 60s when Martin Luther and Malcolm X were alive. And there were several marches in the US. One of the most notable, which culminated in King giving his I Have a Dream speech, was the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom, 1963.
Yes.
Now, recorded history.
At the Statue of Liberty. Yes.
Recorded history states that there were about 250,000 people, 250,000 people that marched for that particular one. Now, if any part of the world has 250,000 people march, some things are constant. Traffic will be disrupted. The dynamics of everything with that city will change. That's like hosting an Olympic event.
There could even be a stampede.
Exactly.
Death. We had one during one of these rallies here in Port Harcourt.
So there are lots of things that could happen when you have that number of people in a space for whatever reason. How did an America handle something like that, considering that they could also be infringing on the rights of those who are not interested in the protest? And now, compared to a Nigeria that believes it has the right to protest as well and can gather people in whatever number, and now we're also having conversations around, your protest, your right ending where mine begins. So when we look to history, how did they handle themselves?
You gave a very classic example. That march in Washington, the crowd was overwhelming.
Yeah.
But they were able to control it. And that is because the American system, being developed and civilized, encourages a large space for individuals to express themselves. So there's not much opposition to protests. Though at the early stage of the civil rights movement, you see the police coming with water hoses, which they pour on people and all that. As different from live ammunitions and all that. If you look at the protest at the EndSARS protests, you notice that live ammunitions were reused, actually, in spite of the several denials by governments, and people died. You seldom hear of those things. And even the Muslims can go on a protest in London, in Washington, parts of the world, where really they do not have much population. And it's allowed because the system allows for that kind of a thing. First of all, I don't think it was necessary for the policemen security people rather, to attack protesters as they did early this morning. They were yet to gather. They were yet to cohere. People are coming from different places and you're there shooting. It hasn't even started. And I think these people have a good way of organizing these things. And the people themselves involved in protests, they understand the limits of the law as to their rights. For instance, to string their arms, their right to shout, their right to do anything. If you notice in that protest organized by Dr. Martin Luther King, people behaved in a very civilized manner.
Yeah. It was a march.
total march.
It was a march.
And the crowd was something else.
Yeah.
But there wasn't much incident. So if you have a crowd like that in Nigeria, within a space, of course, something will happen.
Something definitely
Even
happened.
within a political party, they
Something.
had a rally here. I think it was ANPP.
Something
I
will
can't
happen.
remember the party.
Definitely something
where
will
the crowd
happen.
was so much and people were just dying and falling off.
Well, we have to take this break. After that, we look at the legal mandates connected to the Nnamdi Kanu case. Please stay with us.